On Christmas Eve, my son-in-law changed every lock in my house and sneered. "This is our home now. Old men, get out." I silently packed one single bag and walked into the night. When they woke up, I was gone. And so was the $3 million inheritance. My name is Ralph Cunningham. I'm 67 years old, living in Austin, Texas. I spent 38 years in commercial real estate management before retiring 2 years ago. I built a good life, collected some fine watches, and believed family always came first. My daughter Danielle used to be different. When she was 7, she'd run to greet me every evening and tell me about her day. As an adult, she called every Sunday just to check on me. Then 5 years ago, she met Jason Morrison. He was a mid-level manager at a software company and drove a leased BMW he couldn't really afford, and dressed like a man trying to look wealthier than he was. I noticed those things immediately. Danielle saw charme and ambition. I kept my concerns to myself. That was my first mistake. 3 years ago, they asked to move into my house temporarily. Jason's company was restructuring, and they needed to save money for a down payment. Just 6 months. They promised. I knew 6 months would probably become much longer. But Danielle looked at me with those same eyes from childhood, and I agreed. At first, the changes were small. Then Jason's golf clubs appeared in my garage. His things spread through my kitchen and study. They invited friends over without asking, used my grill, drank my bourbon. Whenever I mentioned it, Danielle smiled. "Dad, we're family. What's yours is ours." I should have corrected that immediately. Instead, I stayed quiet. By the second year, they acted like owners. Jason lounged on my leather sofa, feet on my coffee table, talking loudly about business deals. Danielle stopped treating me like her father and started treating me like an old man occupying space. Eventually, she began referring to it as our house. I always corrected her. "My house. Sweetheart." She would laugh, but there was something cold in her eyes. 6 months before Christmas, I found Jason in my study looking through my papers. Later, I caught him taking photographs of documents with his phone. He didn't even look guilty, only annoyed that I'd interrupted him. That's when I should have acted. Instead, I wanted to believe the best about Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. I went for my usual evening walk and returned around 7 o'clock. I put my key in the lock. It didn't turn. I tried another key. Nothing. I checked the address. My house. I rang the doorbell. Jason opened the door. He didn't move aside. He simply stood there wearing a satisfied smile. "Keys don't work." "Old man." "Jason, what's going on?" "The locks changed them today." He leaned against the doorframe. "We've been talking. This arrangement isn't working anymore." "Arrangement. You living in our house." "My house." He laughed. "C'est. That's the thing about deeds. They can change." Then he said the words I'd never forget. "We're taking over. You're out." I looked past him. Danielle stood behind him, arms crossed. She couldn't meet my eyes. "Sweetheart, you're gonna let him do this." Silence. She looked at the floor. Jason smiled wider. "This is our home now. Old man, time for you to move into a retirement community. This is my property." He stepped closer. "You're getting old. Starting to forget things. Who's going to believe you can manage a property like this?" I looked at my daughter. She opened her mouth, then closed it and looked away. That's when I understood. The daughter I raised would have defended me. This woman wanted me gone. "You've got 30 minutes. Jason said. "Pack your essentials." I could have called the police. I could have fought. Instead, I stayed calm. 38 years in real estate had taught me one thing: never negotiate from emotion. The man who keeps his head wins. 30 minutes. I said quietly. He looked surprised, probably disappointed that I wasn't yelling. He stepped aside and let me enter my own home. I went upstairs. In my bedroom, I took a single duffel bag from the closet. Then I opened the hidden safe behind a painting. Inside were my passport, birth certificate, property deeds, stock certificates, and my late wife's jewelry. I had planned to give that jewelry to Danielle someday. That plan died on Christmas Eve. I also took a USB drive containing copies of every important document I owned. Then I opened my watch cabinet. 43 watches collected over decades. The crown jewel was a Patek Philippe worth $87. Ling ling ling. It sat inside a hidden compartment. I removed only that watch. I left the rest. Let them think they had found everything. The rest of my packing was quick. Clothes, medicine, a few photographs from before Danielle married Jason. 23 minutes later, I walked downstairs. Jason was sitting on my sofa, drinking my bourbon. Danielle stood near the window. "All set?" he asked. "Yes." "Leave your keys." I set them on the table. "I'll need my car." "Call a cab." I did. 5 minutes later, the taxi arrived. As I stepped outside, Jason called after me. "Tomorrow we're cleaning out your junk and selling whatever's valuable." Then he laughed and slammed the door. I heard the new deadbolt click, standing on my own porch, locked out of my own house by my daughter and her husband. I felt something unexpected. Clarity. I gave the driver the address of the Four Seasons Hotel. As we drove through the Christmas lights of Austin, my phone buzzed. A text from Danielle. "I'm sorry it had to be this way. Not sorry for what she had done. Sorry it happened." As though she had no choice. I didn't reply. At the hotel, I spread my documents across the desk. Everything had been prepared 6 months earlier. After I caught Jason photographing my papers, I picked up the phone and called Stuart Hoffman, one of the best real estate attorneys in Austin. "Ralph, everything okay?" "No." I explained what had happened. Silence. Then I said, "Those documents we prepared 6 months ago. It's time. I'll be there in 40 minutes. I looked out over the Austin skyline. Somewhere in my house, Jason and Danielle were probably celebrating. They had absolutely no idea what was coming. Stuart arrived just after midnight, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who already knew this would be ugly. "What exactly did they do?" he asked. I explained everything. The lock change, the threats, Danielle's silence. Then I reminded him of the work we'd done during the previous 6 months. When I first noticed Jason's unusual interest in my documents, I'd quietly begun protecting myself. We had transferred my house into a trust in age. We had moved my financial assets into separate legal structures. Every document had been signed, witnessed, and notarized. Stuart reviewed the paperwork and nodded. "Everything is airtight." "Can they fight it?" "They can try. They'll lose." "How long until they're out?" 3 days. Maybe 4. He made a few phone calls and arranged for an emergency notary. By nearly 3 in the morning, everything had been finalized. The sheriff would receive the paperwork first thing in the morning. After Stuart left, I sat alone in the hotel room. I should have been exhausted. Instead, I felt calm. For 3 years I had watched them slowly take over my home. I had stayed quiet because I didn't want conflict. I didn't want to lose my daughter. Christmas Eve changed that. Something inside me had broken. Or perhaps it had finally awakened. I slept better that night than I had in years. The next morning I woke to 6 missed calls from Danielle. I deleted them. I ordered breakfast and waited. By early afternoon my phone exploded. Call after call. Danielle. Jason. An unknown number. Then more calls. I smiled. The sheriff had arrived. At 3 o'clock. My phone showed 23 missed calls. I finally listened to the voicemails. Jason was furious. "You think you're clever? Old man. Those papers mean nothing." Danielle was crying. "Please call me back. We can fix this." An attorney introduced himself. "I'm representing Jason and Danielle Morrison regarding the property dispute." Property dispute. Interesting phrase. There was no dispute. It was my house. My phone buzzed again. A text from Stuart. "Sheriff served notice. They have 72 hours. I replied with a simple thank you. That evening, I had dinner in the hotel restaurant, a good steak, a glass of wine. For the first time in years, I ate in peace. Meanwhile, my daughter and her husband were learning a painful lesson. Actions have consequences. Over the next 2 days, my phone never stopped ringing. 47 missed calls, voicemails, texts, pleading. threats. Not once did either of them say, "We're sorry." They simply wanted me to undo the consequences. On the third morning, I finally answered. "Dad," Danielle cried. "I've been trying to reach you. I know. 47 times. This is a misunderstanding." "No. Danielle, it isn't." "The sheriff said we have to leave." "You do." "Dad, I'm your daughter, and this is my house." Her voice changed. "That house should be mine someday." There it was. The truth. Not grief. Not regret. Inheritance. "You were trying to speed up the timeline." I said, "No, it wasn't like that." "Really? Then why did you let your husband throw me into the street?" Silence. Then she started crying. "We just needed help. By stealing my house, Jason has debts." Again. Money. Everything came back to money. "You promised I'd be taken care of." "I never promised you an inheritance. But I'm your only child. And you made your choice." She begged. She promised to move out. She promised to apologize. Then she said, the one thing that confirmed everything, "Without your money, we don't know what we're going to do." I closed my eyes. Not once had she asked if I was okay. Not once had she apologized for Christmas Eve. She wanted my money. Nothing more. "There are consequences for your choices, Danielle." Then I hung up. The next 10 days were filled with legal maneuvering. Jason hired an attorney and challenged everything. He claimed I lacked mental capacity. He claimed I had been manipulated. He claimed Danielle had been promised an inheritance. Every argument failed. The judge dismissed the case in less than 20 minutes. The eviction proceeded exactly as planned. I didn't attend. I had no desire to watch them pack. But I received photographs afterward. They had damaged furniture, broken picture frames, scratched wood floors, destroyed personal belongings. Petty revenge. I filed another lawsuit, this time for damages. A few days later, I learned they had moved into Jason's mother's small apartment. Then came even better news. Jason lost his job. His employer considered the legal mess a reputational risk. Without income, his debts exploded. Collection agencies started calling. Everything they had built on greed was collapsing, and I hadn't lifted a finger. I simply refused to rescue them. 10 days after the eviction, I finally returned home. The property manager met me at the door. The house looked terrible. The master bedroom had been wrecked. An antique bed frame my wife loved had been deliberately smashed. My study had been vandalized. Books scattered everywhere. My desk scratched. My leather chair slashed. The damage totaled more than $23,000. I walked through every room in silence. Oddly enough, despite the destruction, the house felt cleaner, lighter, like an illness had finally been removed. I stood in the living room and looked at the sofa where Jason had sat, drinking my bourbon on Christmas Eve. Now it was just a piece of furniture again, no longer a symbol of occupation, just mine. A few days later, I met with estate attorney Regina Collins. She looked over my financial information. "Your estate is worth nearly $6 million. I nodded. "And your daughter is currently the sole beneficiary." "Not anymore." She looked up. "What would you like to do?" I had already made my decision. Dell Children's Hospital. She began writing. "The Austin Homeless Shelter." More notes. "The Firefighters Relief Fund." She stopped. "And your daughter, $1. She blinked. "You want to intentionally exclude her?" "Yes." She studied my face. "Are you certain?" "I've never been more certain about anything." Regina nodded slowly. "Then we'll make it impossible to challenge." Over the next 2 hours, we reviewed every asset. The house, the investment accounts, the watch collection, everything. She recommended additional protections, medical evaluations, witnesses, video recordings of the signing. I agreed to all of it. If Danielle ever challenged the will, I wanted it to fail before it even began. 2 days later, she somehow found out. The phone rang while I was drinking coffee in my study. "Dad, I heard something crazy," she said nervously. "Someone told me you changed your will." "It's true." Silence. "What do you mean it's true?" "I rewrote my estate plan." "You're joking." "No." Her breathing became rapid. "Then, what happens to me You receive $1. Another long silence. $1. Yes. You have almost $6 million. I know. Where's the rest going? Charity. Her voice broke. You're giving everything away. Yes. Why? Because of Christmas. She started crying. It was one mistake. No. Danielle. It was a choice. We were desperate. That doesn't give you the right to throw your father out of his own home. I'll leave Jason. She said quickly. I'll apologize. I'll do anything. I closed my eyes. She still didn't understand. The problem wasn't Jason. It never had been. The problem was that she had stood there and watched. You showed me exactly what our relationship meant to you. That's not true. Then why didn't you stop him? She had no answer. In the background, I heard Jason demanding to know what was happening. He changed his will, she cried. A moment later, I heard him shouting, he can't do that. I almost laughed. Yes. I could. And I had. I hung up. Over the next hour, my phone rang repeatedly. I ignored every call. Then there was a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole. Danielle. She looked exhausted. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. Dad. Please. What do you want? I'll divorce Jason. There it was again. Calculation. She still thought the problem was him. The problem isn't Jason. I said, I made a mistake. No. You made a choice. Tears streamed down her face. I'll do anything. I looked at her quietly. You stood there while your husband threw me into the street. She started crying harder. Please. You're sorry about the consequences. You're not sorry about the choice. I closed the door. I heard her crying outside for several minutes before she finally left. The house became quiet again. Completely mine. A month later, I learned she had filed for divorce. Jason fought it. By then, their financial situation was collapsing. Their debts had grown. Neither of them could pay. Jason's mother eventually threw them out of her apartment. They moved into separate places. Then a letter arrived. 8 pages. The first 6 were filled with apologies. Detailed apologies. Specific apologies. Then came the final 2 pages. Requests. Could I help with her security deposit? Could I help with a car? Could I send a little money each month? I put the letter down. If she had truly changed, the letter would have ended with the apology. Instead, she was still counting my money. The packaging had changed. The product hadn't. I declined every request. Then an unexpected opportunity appeared. Dell Children's Hospital contacted me about my planned donation. A reporter from the Austin American-Statesman wanted an interview. I agreed. Perhaps it was time for everyone to know exactly where my estate would eventually go. The article painted me as a local philanthropist planning major charitable contributions. I didn't mention Danielle by name. I simply said, disappointment from those we love can teach us what truly matters. A few days later, she called again. I read the article. Then you know where my priorities lie. I want to see you. I should have refused. Instead, I agreed to one meeting. A week later, we met at a hospital fundraiser. She looked different. Older. Tired. Life had been hard on her. After my speech, we stepped into a quiet hallway. I've been in therapy, she said. I nodded. I finally understand what I did. I waited. What I lost wasn't the inheritance. She whispered, it was you. For the first time, she sounded sincere. Then I asked her a question. If I had been poor, would you still be standing here? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Silence answered for her. I reached into my pocket and handed her an envelope. Inside was a check. $50,000. She stared at it. This is the last money you'll ever receive from me. Tears filled her eyes. Dad, this isn't reconciliation. She began to cry. Can't there ever be a way back? I thought about Christmas Eve. The locked door. Jason's smile. Hair silence. Then I answered, no. She looked like she had been punched. You don't deserve this money. I said softly, but take it anyway. Consider it your inheritance. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. 2 weeks later, I sat in Regina Collins' office for the final signing. Everything had been prepared. The house, the investment accounts, the watch collection, Every asset was documented and protected. 3 witnesses sat in the room. A notary waited beside them. Regina reviewed the final numbers. My estate was worth approximately $5. 7 millions. Dell Children's Hospital would receive a substantial portion. The Austin Homeless Shelter would receive another. The Firefighters Relief Fund would receive the rest. And Danielle Regina asked one last time, $1. She nodded. I signed. The witnesses signed. The notary stamped every page. It was done. Challenge-proof. As close to legally untouchable as possible. That evening I sat in my study with a cup of coffee. The house was quiet. Peaceful. Mine. For the first time in years. There were no footsteps in the hallway. No voices in the kitchen. No feeling that strangers had taken over my life. A month later, I learned that Danielle's divorce had been finalized. There were no assets to divide. Only debt. Jason and Danielle split more than $140. 0 inches obligations and legal expenses. They had destroyed themselves financially. Not because of me. Because of their choices. Jason moved to Dallas, chasing new opportunities and, I suspected, new victims. Danielle stayed in Austin. She found a modest job and rented a small apartment. I heard all of this through mutual acquaintances. I didn't investigate. I didn't need to. Life was handling things perfectly well without my involvement. A few weeks later, I received one final letter from Danielle. It was short. No requests. No demand. No mention of money. She wrote that she finally understood. She understood that what she had lost wasn't an inheritance. It was her father. She wrote that she didn't expect forgiveness and wasn't asking for another chance. She only wanted me to know that she was sorry. I read the letter twice. Then I placed it in a drawer with the others. I didn't reply. Not because I hated her. I didn't. I simply accepted reality. Some things, once broken, cannot be repaired. A relationship can survive arguments. It can survive disappointment. Sometimes it can even survive betrayal. But it cannot survive the moment when someone watches you being destroyed and chooses to say nothing. That was Christmas Eve. That was the moment everything ended. Months later, I attended another fundraiser for Dell Children's Hospital. The cardiac wing expansion had begun. Children would receive treatment there one day. Families would find hope there. I stood in the new wing and looked around. My money would do something meaningful. It would help people. That seemed like a far better legacy than leaving millions to someone who had already counted it before I was dead. That night, I returned home and sat in my favorite chair. I took out my Patek Philippe, the one watch I had rescued on Christmas Eve. I wound it carefully and listened to its soft ticking. Time moves forward. Always. I thought about the last 5 months, being locked out of my home, the legal battles, the missed calls, the tears, the begging, the anger. Then I thought about the silence, my daughter's silence on that porch. In the end, that was what changed everything. People often think justice means revenge. I don't. Justice is simply allowing consequences to exist. Jason and Danielle made their choices. I didn't ruin them. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't destroy their lives. I simply refused to save them. And sometimes, that's enough. I looked around my house one final time. Quiet, peaceful, mine. For the first time since Danielle married Jason, I felt completely free. Not happy, not sad, just clear. And I had learned something important. An inheritance isn't money. It's trust, respect, loyalty. When those things disappear, the money means nothing. I finished my coffee, set down the watch, and smiled. Outside, Austin carried on with its ordinary evening. Cars passed. People laughed. The world kept moving, exactly as it should. And for the first time in a very long time, I was at peace.